14th. Forestry Board meeting in session. Do roll call.
Chair Burke,
Here.
Vice Chair Fuller,
Here.
Board Member Mallory,
Here.
Board Member Forestry.
Here.
We all made it. Number 2 here, we'll do the approval of September 9th minutes. Does anybody have any changes or suggestions?
I don't have any changes.
I don't have any either.
We'll get a motion for approval.
I move that we approve the minutes of the September 9th meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Visitor communication.
Do not have any-
Moving on to board business, welcome Garden Blue Spruce. Do you have any info on that?
So this is a group that's located in the Welcome Garden, section of Cedar and Hood. A new ADA crosswalk has been constructed around that garden where none existed before, sort of a crosswalk to nowhere. In order to increase pedestrian safety at this crosswalk, a street light needs to be installed, and this tree conflicts with that installation. Staff is not recommending replacement due to the density in that area right now. And we do believe that once it's removed, the void will be filled fairly quickly with the trees.
And it's a really ugly looking blue spruce, if you've taken a look at it.
Yeah, I'm in favor of a street light over that blue spruce.
Yeah, I don't have any comment on this. I'm ready to vote.
I'm fine.
I'd like to make a motion for the removal of the blue spruce.
I move for the removal of a declining blue spruce near the intersection of South Cedar Street and East Hood Avenue for street light installation.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chair, the motion.
Be here, dead 18-inch DBH Ponderosa Pine on the South Oak Street right away.
The tree is visibly dead. It is near some overhead power lines, making it a bit of a hazard. It's not very close to them, but should it fall, it could potentially.
I went and checked it out the other day and I noticed that it's got the red turpentine beetle at the base, the frass from that. And I was considering whether or not it'd be good as a habitat snag, rather than complete removal. But if it's infested with beetles, it kind of seems like it's a little less than ideal for that. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
What was the name?
A red turpentine beetle kind of attacks the base of the tree and leaves some frass. I have some photos if you guys are interested in seeing them.
They carry little cans of turpentine to get the main pitch off.
But if the tree is infested with beetles, we don't want that, correct?
Well, I think that the beetles are probably, they're native, they're everywhere. But whether or not I don't know, is Dan on the call today or is he here? He might know better than me. Oh, okay. I was just wondering if it was just the red turpentine beetle, it might not be that big of an issue because typically they just attack stressed trees. But if the tree already had other beetles in it, that probably killed it. I don't know. There's 6 or 7 stumps right in that area. So maybe there's an issue going on with beetle kill. I don't know if you guys have any history or
They're pretty old stumps. Yeah.
Okay.
Those are probably 5+ years old.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
The only thing to consider safety wise is there is a community path through there.
Mhm.
That's just showed up just because people use it to cut through from that back neighborhood over to Jefferson. So it does see some pedestrian traffic, and overhead hazards would be a concern for us.
Yeah, I'm for cutting it down.
Mhm.
Any input?
Well, I liked the idea of leaving at least part of it for habitat for wildlife, but in this particular situation, I've walked there many, many, many times, and there's a lot of trees there. I think it would be just as well to take it all the way down for just kind of general thinning purposes, and especially if there's wires overhead. So that's my thought.
We'll make a motion for removal.
Sure. I make a motion for the complete removal of the dead 18-inch DBH ponderosa pine at South Oak Street right away.
Second,
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to other business. We have in the South Oak Tree right-of-way trees. Here by Bratton. Well,
You want it at the podium or at the table? Where should I have them? I can stand right here. No, we need to get you on the recording. Unfortunately.
Yeah, Dana, if you just want to come, take a seat over here.
distribute some material?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just a reminder, yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Dana.
Thank you, Pat, for letting me come in. So I'm Dana Bratton. I'm a resident of Sisters. I own, what I call I'm Dana Bratton, a resident of Sisters, and I'm developing a property that I call the George Sproat home site. It's north of St. Helens and south of Jefferson, about 2 blocks south of the Sisters Coffee Shop. That first exhibit I gave you was a plat of the area, and Oak Street right-of-way, you just talked about a dead tree in that right-of-way, is an unimproved right-of-way that has a sweet little grove of ponderosa pine trees. I've counted about 68 trees. The second exhibit you have is a blow up of the map, and those little green X's, there's 68 X's. Not that that's a survey, it just gives you an idea of the density of that, what I call an urban forest, or I've now coined it as the Oak Street Grove. Paul mentioned that there's a walking path on it. If you look at the third exhibit, it's a series of photos, not very good, but it gives you an idea. Originally, there was, or even before the walking path, there was a ditch across that property. That was the Smith Ditch that ran water from Whitechoose Creek up to north, up by the airport. And when they stopped irrigating that land, that ditch went dry. But there was a path along the side of it, and I've talked to a few long-term residents that were children that played in that ditch as kids, pollywogs, tadpoles, frogs, all those kinds of fun things. The ditch has been dry for a number of years, but the path remains open and when I was on the Parks Advisory Committee, I felt like that was a significant urban trail that allowed foot traffic to go north and south through that area. On busy event weekends, we've counted as many as 100 to 120 people that use it daily. On quiet days, maybe 20 or so. It's a great way to access downtown in a very walkable part of town. So I think it's a valuable resource, and I'm glad you're removing the dead tree. I would tell Paul that there is a power line. Pictures. Did you get the pictures? Jacqueline, could you share the, and sorry for the poor quality, but there's, you can kind of make out a power pole that's the historic access of power to George Sproat's historic residence. It's been there for about 120 years. He actually unbelievably lived there for 70 years. He moved in 1953 and passed away in 1923. And then my wife and I bought the property primarily because we had been watching it. And I told her I had some energy and someone needed to care for that historic home site. It's 9 platted lots in the Davidson addition. Paul, that power line is going to come down next spring when that house is removed. But I guess I would say when when you drop the tree, it might be close. I'm not sure. It looks like it's fairly close to that single line that feeds into that house. I've read the urban forestry plan. I'm aware of the city's conversation about fire fuel in town, and obviously we're all aware of forest fires, tree fires, fires in general. And so I'm just proposing that as an urban forester comes on board, that we give it some thought. I don't have a plan other than I'm working close to it, and I observe one primarily is the ladder fuel. Those trees, you can see in some of those photos, there's a lot of dead limbs down low. On the site that I'm working with, give you an idea, we had 3 35-inch ponderosas. We cleaned up the ladder fuel and paid $300 per tree. So I took the $300 per tree and multiplied it by my 68 trees and came up with a little over $20,000. They charge more to drop a big tree. I think I'm not suggesting a plan. I don't have one. I'm just making you aware that that's there. The other issue is, of course, pine needles and pine cones that drop and dead grasses that grow. Some of the neighbors have randomly and not very organized, but they've raked pine needles and hauled them away from time to time, which I think is good practice throughout town. It could stand some thinning. You know, I've seen your spacing of trees recommended. Some of them are very tight. And there's a couple other issues. The old ditch ran underneath Jefferson. I show you a picture of a culvert. It's still open. I don't have a thought there other than it seems like a bit of a hazard. It's big enough that a kid could crawl into it if they wanted to, or certainly animals. It doesn't come out on the other side. It's just an open culvert on the, that would be the south side of Jefferson Street. So little things that I've observed because I've been there close. I'd love to be a part of that process or that conversation. I've talked with my wife about making a grant to the City of Sisters to assist in financial needs to care for those trees. Because I know your budgets. So the urban forestry board's pretty small. And so I mean, I was doing some math with her this afternoon. I thought, you know, if we just clean the trees, maybe we could, you know, make a grant of $20,000 to the city to at least get started on caring for those trees. So it's kind of in the name of good management of an urban forest, maybe making it a signature place. I even thought as far as putting in park bench in there for people that wanted to read a book or something like that. So for now, I'm just making you aware of it and eager to be a part of a volunteer effort to manage those trees. Thank you. Questions? Thank you.
I can't ask any because it might come before the council, so I'm just gonna sit here and listen.
Oh, okay. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you for your interest.
I have a question before you go.
Oh.
Could you just address your property versus these trees? Like, is there a buffer space where there's no trees, or do these trees come right up to the property line of the property you purchased? Kinda like
So
help
the
us-
Grove has a few open spaces in it. I don't know that those are buffers. It's not symmetrical, but as I look at it, there's some open spaces. Oh, and I had thought one of the things that the urban forestry plan discusses is the introduction of new trees, like an understory. These are all trees that are like 200 feet tall.
Mhm.
There are a couple of juniper trees that are smaller, but for the most part, when I look at it and I look at a healthy forest, I think that there should be a new crop of trees perhaps to replace these. So part of my thought for a plan for this would be um, the introduction of some secondary trees, not many, but just something to give it some character.
Mhm.
There's not much of a buffer. We have a split rail fence between the property I'm working on and the Oak Street right of way. And so my site is smaller. There were 17 trees, ponderosa pine trees on the property that I'm working with. And we're trying to preserve as many of those as possible.
Good.
Yeah. So I think there are fewer because it was under private ownership and they probably cleared some at one time.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you very much. And
You're
the
welcome.
presentation is really clear. And I cherish that little pathway. I think it's a delightful part of Downtown Sisters to have that accessible. And also, thank you so much for your very generous offer
Mhm.
of a $20,000 grant, or however you would term it, to help with managing these trees.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana.
Sure.
Anyone have any more discussion on that? How is?
What, yeah, like what are the next steps for something like this?
This is a new one.
Jackson, do you have any guidance on what factors we should be considering here?
That's a new one.
I think the first thing could be just getting a overall assessment of the property by a forester. Go in there and figure out, the diameters of the trees, the healthy, the not so healthy. Are there any diseases? Is there a spacing issue? Do trees need to be removed? And get a report from a forester on that, and then bring that back to the board with the recommendations for approval, and then we can move ahead with budgeting dollars to get the work done. Some of this work done could be this winter potentially, but we're probably looking, if the bill is high enough, after budget 2025. So after July 1st next year. It's a good place to start.
And Paul, do you think it would be appropriate to ask Dan to do this?
No, we're gonna talk about a new city forester here, a further agenda item, so no, it'd be somebody local,
Okay,
because Dan's in Roseburg.
right.
permanently.
It'd be a slog for him.
Yeah, he'd have to come.
What's the total size of this area?
Why? That's the right way. 200.
Thank you.
And question for Paul. And maybe you too, Jackson. Is there any other similar pathway within sister city limits? With these kind of characteristics, with a lot of trees and people have been using it forever and. Right. But I'm thinking of similar to this, like connecting one street to another, right in a neighborhood. Is there anything else like that?
Yeah, there's kind of an informal path down the Elm Street right of way, just south of the bridge.
Hmm.
On the east side of Elm Street.
Yep.
Takes
Right.
people from the creek up to Tyee.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been on that.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that we capture, Dana's vision through this as well with being, supporting it and issuing the grant and to make sure that we're following the vision and what his expectations were of the work being done through the research that we'll do to make sure we're doing it right. So,
Yeah, can we add it back on as an agenda item, I guess, for a month or two? We can revisit, I guess, is that?
yeah, I would like to keep this on other business, so we just
thinking about it a little?
keep the motivation and keep making sure we're getting the right stuff done and where this can come to fruition.
And I would say that because this may come before city council, I'm just going to be quiet.
So Paul, can you initiate getting assessment of the?
Is there a consensus to move ahead with that? Between,
I'm fine
You
with
need a
it.
motion
Members.
for it? Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
absolutely.
I
Well-
think that's a great first step. You have to, yeah, evaluate the site for sure.
Do you need a formal motion for that? Okay, great.
And I think the culvert, we can check in with the irrigation district, that would be their culvert. To see if we can close off the open end. I don't really want to rip it out of the road just because require a road cut. But if we could demo the end of it to make it more safe, that makes a lot of sense.
Does to me.
Mhm.
See if they'd have any issues with that.
Is there any value in looking at this to become city park? Does that make sense?
It's been looked at a few times in park master plan updates. It's really, we leave that up to the park board on what they want to prioritize. And it just hasn't, it's been kind of kept lower on the priority list, just kind of leave it as is, maintain it as is. We have a crew go in once a year typically and pull out all the pine needles, pine cones. It generates a lot of debris. So that's something we typically do in the spring.
So it's more of a natural space that we would be, I don't know if we have different levels of types of parks, but it sounds more like a natural space, a maintained natural space,
Linear park.
linear park.
Yep.
Okay.
So are we agreed? I heard Avery and myself, but I didn't really hear anything specific from you and.
To move forward with the forester
Mhm.
report? Yes, I,
Okay,
Yeah.
you're good, Pat?
Yeah, we're all in favor of the
Okay.
forestry report.
Sounds good.
So more to come on that, Dana. Moving on to other business, Arbor Day update.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emmy Shoup. I'm the Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. And I just wanted to give a really quick update about Arbor Day event planning for Arbor Day 2025. I think most of you here are on that little subcommittee task force where we're taking initiative on planning for Arbor Day 2025. And it looks like we're kind of leaning towards more of an Arbor Day week where maybe we host a bunch of little events that kind of lean on partnerships with other agencies, nonprofits, and businesses in the community just to kind of reach more of the community, kind of spread um, the awareness about Arbor Day and being a Tree City USA. So that might look like working with the Sisters Library, coordinating with them on like a reading event where like they read a children's book that is about trees. Maybe Paulina Springs Bookstore brings in a tree expert author. Um, as far as like a tree planting event, we still plan to do that. It just might be more scaled down this upcoming year because we're looking for locations and sites where it might be suitable for tree planting and just doesn't look like it's working out for this 2025, but maybe 2026. East Portal might be ready for some trees or some other locations might be ready for trees. Hold on, let me pull up my notes. So again, I welcome ideas for locations for a tree planting event, but we're looking at maybe partnering with the school district, going where the kids are and just planting a few trees on their property. And we've talked with Sisters Parks and Rec District on kind of maybe partnering with them to bring in some more kids activities to make it a more robust event or just a little bit more engaging. Uh, Another idea that came up was some sort of like art installation where it's very collaborative and passive, where kids can come and take a coloring page. And I guess the end product would be like a big, I'm imagining it be a big tree, and kids can color in pine cones and squirrels and birds and everything that calls trees their habitat, their home. And that could be kind of a cumulative art installation that people can see throughout April or just over the span of a week. Uh, so we're kind of fine tuning this Arbor Day week and what that might look like. And next steps would be preparing a rough budget that we might bring to city council for them to say, hey, we're on board with this concept, or maybe we don't want this. And they can kind of make that final call before we start moving ahead with recruiting partners to be a part of the event and really making things solidified. Any comments or thoughts? Feedback?
I didn't know there was so much planning that went into Arbor Day.
There wasn't. And after some feedback that Arbor Day could be better, this is kind of the effort that we're putting into making Arbor Day better and more community-wide involvement than just like an isolated class of students that typically get to be invited. So.
Yeah, no, I think there'd be some interest from the school district and students on this and to be involved and so. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Emmy.
Up next is the Heritage Tree update.
Thank you, everybody who took a look at the Heritage Street form, gave comments, all the work you folks put into it. We do have a webpage now on our website for the Heritage Street program with the documents. The webpage itself did get a little lost in their transition to our new website. You can still find it by searching Heritage Street Program in the search search function. But I'm gonna be working with our, communications coordinator tomorrow, getting that page back. Dedicated, a little more easy for folks to access. But the documents are on our website and the program is up.
That's great.
Thank you for getting that together. I did notice that there was a hard copy at the front desk here when I came in the other day.
So applications are, it's open now for applications. Have we received any?
Any other comment on Heritage Tree? Good.
I'm excited to look through that. I didn't know that, so I'm looking forward to checking out the websites.
City Forester update.
So just wanted to give you an update of what we're planning on doing with the city forester position. As you remember, when Dan gave his notice, we went out to search for a city forester and we got one response from the firm out of Salem, and they were very expensive and a lot of travel time for what we need. We need somebody local. So Dan was able to help us out over the last few months, and now that he is permanently in Roseburg, we need to go back out again, and our plan is to issue a job search for actually it'll be more of a proposal search for a firm, hopefully local. We're gonna strive for local, and mention that in the RFP as well, to see what we get, and it's possible that we might have someone local that's interested.
Where do you put that out for when people can't view that? There's like organ buys, there's like Apex Accelerator.
So we put it in the plan center in Bend. Do you remember where else we sent that, Jackson?
It's posted to our website as well, and then there was assistance from ODF to distribute it to their mailing list and post it on the website.
Are there opportunities for a broader reach in the event that maybe there are some candidates that would be willing to move here from outside of the state? Could that possibly be the next step if we're not finding anything within Oregon area?
That's where we could use that Oregon Department of Forestry resource to go statewide.
They would, okay. But would we go beyond the state? Do we need to go that far maybe? Or you want to just take the next step to statewide and then we'll see if we got to go further?
We try to go local and see what we get, just because it's going to be more efficient. There's going to be cost savings having somebody local versus having to pay a couple hours travel time.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking about somebody who would literally be willing to move here.
And that's
Right.
tough, right? With housing and those types of things, so I think
Okay.
you're going to be limited there as well.
I think too, Cheryl, the contract is not so big that somebody would take it on.
Oh,
You know what
okay.
I mean?
It's
I
not
think
a
that
full-time
might be
time.
helpful.
contract.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's at most a couple hours a week,
Okay.
unless there's a project like the Oak Street project. There could be some days where
Who does City of Bend and Redmond use?
they have their own on staff.
They have their own on staff? And you're Redmond,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
That sounds good to you guys. We'll move ahead.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Good to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Bullet point E, private tree removal.
Yeah, it's
already
A
gone.
little more than that, but at the Wednesday, city council meeting last week, the city council took up the recommendation from this group, uh, through our, our code enforcement officer to look at how to enforce trees coming down that have been directed to be remained, thinking about what happened out in Pine Meadow, not Pine Meadow, my brain just, for example,
The Woodlands.
thank you. The Woodlands, where that big tree came down that had been marked for saving. And the fine was relatively insignificant. So this group worked to create some language and appropriate fine language to go along with it. That went to the city council. 3 options were presented. One was basically to leave it as it is. Second was to bump up the fine and also have a tree value assessed. And the third was the DBH number of 300 for DBH. There was a lot of discussion. Uh, Everybody was pretty much on board with it. The real discussion centered around, do we need to charge more? That's really where it was starting to go. And there was a lot of discussion about whether or not it would be easy to assess the value of one tree versus another tree versus one species versus another species, and how do we have the bandwidth within the department that handles code violations to be able to do that. So the council then proposed raising it from the $300 that you folks came up with to $400. It was kind of a compromise between a couple of folks who wanted it at 5. And so that's where the council settled, but I was asked to bring to you folks that they were going to do so and make sure that no one in this group felt like they were not taking your recommendation of 300 seriously, because they did. And, but if they wanted to, the council has a lot of respect for what the advisory committees say to do. So here we're taking what you said to do and we're changing it. The only thing we're changing is the amount of the fine, and we're making it go higher. Is that okay with this group? If it's not, I'll take it back to the council and tell them.
So if I understand correctly, it's per inch over the DBH?
Oh, it's by DBH. So it's DBH times $500.
That was 400.
400, thank you, sorry.
For any species.
Yes. And the concept of that, and that was what came out of this group. The number you came up with was 300. That was a proposal that was forwarded, that went to planning, and planning then took that and put language around it with different kinds of codes. So typically we get multiple versions of how to do it, so we can make a choice. And
I thought we agreed upon like over like 8 or 12 inches or something.
well, it may have been. The only thing that changed in the language that you came up with, without it in front of me, the only thing that changed in the language was the amount per DBH at the point of violation.
Because I think we gave like the first 6 or 8 inches.
I think you
something
probably
like that,
did too.
and then
Yeah.
For every inch.
Well, it's removing significant trees.
Yeah.
So there is in the code, there's a definition of what is a significant tree, and it's tied to being over so many DBH.
And also, I think there's more value on ponderosas and junipers.
Oh, yeah, I think that, that's all part of that discussion, but the idea is that we want an individual who's looking at removing a tree to come and talk to the city and go through that process, where the city might say, yeah, that juniper can go, that in your example. Also, we want to be sure that when developments are platted and trees are marked for saving in a development, and the developer decides to remove a tree without consulting with the city, that there be enough fine to make it worth their time to come in and ask the question, as opposed to, oh, $300, $400, okay, here's the check. And you lose a 42-inch DBH tree. And that was how this whole discussion came to you folks. So really, the only thing that changed in the language was the fine amount.
Gotcha.
So whatever you forwarded to the group, without it in front of me, I apologize, I don't have it in front of me. is the only thing they changed. So I think there was a DBH, but I think it was talk about significant trees, and the concept was that's defined elsewhere in the development code. Is that your recollection, Paul?
We can look it up.
Yeah, I don't have the,
My memory was that it was and or, so if we wanted to have, it would be initially it was $300 per inch of DBH and or the assessed value of the tree. On the
Uh,
occasion that it might be.
well, that was one of the options that was put forward. And
Oh, okay,
the
maybe.
problem became for the council was who would do the assessing and how do we assess it with a limited staff of people? And so that's when the discussion was, well, maybe we raise the amount of the fine. So if you use the 42-inch DBH tree as an example, that $400 times the 42 becomes a significant amount of money. Enough so that the person would think twice before they did it and would probably hopefully come in and talk to the appropriate folks in the city and say, here's why we think this tree has to go. I know we're going to save it. What can we do? So the main thing the council wants to know is, are you okay with a larger fine? That's really the question.
You mentioned, I was listening to city council meeting
Yeah.
recording. And there was an instance where there was a tree taken down, and I think it's the infamous
Yes.
pine needles getting on the RV
Oh,
story.
yeah, that was in the city right away. That's a totally different thing.
That was in the right of way. Okay,
That was a tree literally in the right of way.
okay,
And the
but
best
that was
part
the,
was after he cut it down, because he wanted to park his RV there too, he backed his RV into it and dented the rear of the RV, so the tree got the final.
but in that case, there was a fine amount based on code. And is it correct that the city manager overrode that fine and lowered it?
Lowered the fine. Not the current city manager.
Correct. But that's still an option. That's something a city manager could do.
Not as this is written, I don't believe. I think
Okay.
when that happened with the street tree, and Paul, again, correct me, the number came up and,
It was 30,000, I think, and it was brought down to 15.
I don't know, it was a big number that went down to, cut basically in half. And I think that decision to cut it in half was done without consultation with council or with the Urban Forestry Board or with
Oh,
anyone else. I was not happy when I heard it. I know that for a fact. And I think other councilors weren't either. But I think that there was a sense of, the individual might go to court to contest the value of the tree, although I don't think they would have been successful. When you drop a tree in the middle of a city street on top of a sewer system that is a city street tree, that's significant. One of the old growth trees in town. So it was not a small tree. It was a big puppy.
okay. I was trying to get an understanding of,
Yeah.
regardless of the amount, are we just going to be up against somebody being able to say, oh, well, we're just going to change that amount?
I can't speak to that totally. I think it's going to be in the code.
Okay.
And I think that once it's in the code, then I think they could come in and ask for a reduction. But I think that would have to go before the city council as opposed to going before the city manager. Whereas this was a city street tree, went before the city manager.
So,
And we didn't have any of this language in this group. A lot of this work we've been talking about has come about somewhat as a result of some of these very things that have occurred.
so for the woodlands tree that came down, without telling the city that shouldn't have come down, that was at least 42 inches.
I would think it was a big, Paul could tell you because he was there not long after it came down.
Should be $16,800.
Right, and, I'm fine with it, the fine being higher. I do remember that we had some language in there about, and you could go out and get the tree assessed for value, which, when we were talking about it, I didn't assume that would be a city employee's task, but rather a consultant would be hired to assess the value. So it sounds like that has disappeared from the
I'd have to bring up
language.
the actual, see if I can get
How
up
would they
the
assess it when it's?
agenda.
Well, you have Avery could speak to it better, but you have criteria like the diameter, the type of tree, what other trees are around it.
It would have to be
It's-
like an
it-
emergent call because they removed the stump and everything. It's gone.
Yeah, a lot of times too, though, we're talking about trees that have already been surveyed, you know, because they're saying, hey,
Mhm.
we decided we're gonna preserve this tree. You're gonna have some information on the tree, and then it's really common in tree assessment or tree appraisals to have the tree completely gone, and so it's like an issue that people that do tree.
And this was
appraisals
done
face.
at the workshop, so this was not everybody votes on it. This was what,
Oh,
um,
okay.
this was done at the workshop level. So there's more opportunity after that, but it was which proposal do you want us to take forward? And I'm trying to find the document, if we were given it by,
The original code amendments that were brought to you, there's a recommendation of $300 per inch of diameter. And then a supplemental replacement fine as well.
right. And that's what the,
It says the city may require the responsible party to pay an additional fine in the amount of the replacement value, which is determined by a plant appraisal authored by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. And that process is what our city forester had done for us
Mhm.
previously. So,
I think that there was on the part, I think we were given three proposals. And I'm just looking here in the packet, and unfortunately, I don't see, his presentation. Let me see. Draft code language. Oh, here we are. Option one, first violation, include a limitation, each significant tree removal approval permit, blah, blah, there's all these numbers. Is a separate offense. Each offense is punishable by a civil penalty of not less than $500, not to exceed 2,000. So that was one language. Option two, removing significant trees with a trunk diameter between 8 and 20 inches without approval, civil penalty of 2,000 per tree. Move of significant trees 20 more than 20 inches would be a civil penalty of 4,000. Those didn't go very far with this, with the city council. The last one, yeah, each violation, this is what was brought forward by the planning department to us. Okay. Each violation of the code, including with limitation, each significant tree removal, approval, permit, or violation of the code is a separate offense. Each offense is punishable by a civil penalty of 300 inch at DBH. So that was, now remember what you sent and what your language went to the planning commission. This went to the planning commission. The planning commission was 100% in favor of it. But somewhere in that process, I think did get dropped,
Just got dropped.
the concept of the, um,
Supplemental, optional
Appraisal.
supplemental.
supplemental proposal. I'm not seeing that in here, but those were the three positions that were presented to the city council.
I see it.
And the council, felt very strongly that they wanted the fine to be as large as it could be realistically.
Mhm.
There was some discussion by a couple of council members about the value of the tree. They brought it up, it came up in the discussion. And there wasn't a lot of interest in trying to do that, at least as part of code enforcement right now. And some of that has to do with just how code works. You know, but the guy who does the code enforcement is the one that comes around and tells you you have to cut the grass in front of your house, or that your political signs
Right.
can't be on the street, or those kinds of things. So this is the big step up to some degree, what we're doing with code enforcement. Would you agree, Paul?
yeah, versus the $500. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, so when the tree came down to $500, it's
Oh, I
like
know.
cost of doing business. It's a load of gravel.
I think one comment that I would make is that when you do the flat rate per DBH, I think what happens is compared to tree appraisal, you're gonna overvalue the smaller trees and then undervalue the larger trees. And because those bigger trees, as they get up 40 inches or so, they're gonna have these additional, you know, habitat value and all these things where it really starts to put out tons of ecosystem services. Whereas that small tree is not providing too much, however, its DBH, you know, compared to its DBH it's gonna be a pretty valuable tree, you know.
I think that,
$4,000 tree for a 10-inch tree.
well, I don't disagree with any of it, and I also think that there may be, I don't want to put this, um, let's get something in the code that's substantial.
Mhm.
And then if we need to move that forward a little, once it's in the code, it's kind of easy to change some of that language. Not easy, but it's there. It goes into our, list of fees and fines. Um, you know, if you, this has not come to the city council for approval yet. This
Right.
has been workshopped. And if there is a sense that there really, that the value of the tree component that was in some of the original discussion that was forwarded got dropped, and you'd like to see it back, I can take that back to them. They asked me to come, the real key was to be sure that raising the amount of the fine didn't offend anybody. And
I don't think anybody's offended.
well, that's exactly what I said, but I also think that I had forgotten that this group had a discussion about the value of the tree on top of it. It was discussed and kind of gone away, but I think that, boy, I don't know. If we change it much, does it have to go back through the planning commission? Who've already 100% approved it.
It would be nice to go back to the planning meeting minutes and see how was it presented? Maybe it got dropped
I
off
think
before they
it
saw
got
it.
presented just like this. This is the language that went to the planning commission.
Oh,
Same language that came to us. And
okay.
we do find occasionally this- that we make a suggestion for language in our workshops, and then when it comes back to us after it goes through a planner's brain, no offense, Sammy, if you're back there, through a planner's brain, that it looks different. Because they look at it very differently. I think that when you go to planning school, they beat common sense out and they beat code in. One ear and the other. And so sometimes it looks different. And occasionally we said, no, this is what we want. We'll go back and put it in. And it does get put in. So I can't recall, I know that, like I said, without the minutes in front of me, the discussion might have been Susan Cobb, but someone did bring up the value of the tree and maintaining that concept. And I didn't sense a great degree of support of some of the council members because I just thought it would be too hard to try to implement it. And it's also the part that we most likely to be challenged in court and create a court situation where the city might have expenses, because then it becomes arbitrary as opposed to this is definitive.
Hmm.
And I will say that at least one council wanted 500. So, but there were two that wouldn't go that high. So 4 was the number they came up with.
So Gary, you're saying that the optional supplemental amount just got into that gray area of potentially being challenged by courts?
I don't
Is
think
that
it
what?
was, this is the language that was presented in the
Uh-huh.
workshop.
We don't really know why it got dropped.
But there
But it-
was,
but it
there
got
was
dropped.
discussion about it in the workshop between the council members and the staff.
Okay.
And in that discussion, there was on parts of the council, some of our probably more property rights folks were very concerned about, what's the value of I think the comment was, what's the value of a Aspen versus a Ponderosa or something like that, and you've done a very good job of telling us what the value is the value of the habitat, the other things that are hard to measure. But then that comes back to, if you go to court with someone over the amount of the fine, are you going to find somebody who understands and rules in your favor, or are you going to find somebody in favor of the person who cut the tree down, and then you've got other issues there again. So I think the ideal is to try to make the code as clean as you can.
Mhm.
I think that's how they think. And I'm putting words in their mouth, but
I The only part about that, I think I didn't understand where you're coming from. The only part about it that's kind of perplexing to me is because it's an option at the, it's an option provided to the city council. Why it would create initially, any turmoil, because you could say, well, city council doesn't want to utilize that option of a tree appraisal in this case, right? But whereas if it's, or at the, request of city council, the tree could be appraised. That seems kind of like, it doesn't seem very limiting to me, but,
I don't have an answer to that. It's a sensible argument. I told Jackson this would take 3 minutes. I guess I didn't know what I was talking about. Because in my mind, this was the language you'd put forward, because it'd been long enough since this went through the process, the planning commission, everybody else, that I was pretty happy that that's where they were at. I know the value of the tree was a discussion that was had, but it wasn't in the language that was given to the city councilors. Any thoughts? Did I miss anything, Paul?
The replacement value is still effective for any public tree that gets.
Right. Right. It doesn't change. These are significant trees on private property, a developer's property or something like that. That's what we're dealing with. The language, we have the value of the tree in the city code for public right-of-way trees. So it may be simple to put it in there as well. I don't know, but I think there was a sense on the council that a $16,000 or $18,000 fine would be enough to make a developer think twice before cutting down a tree. And whether it is or not, I don't know. I'm not a developer. But if it starts to get into money that affects, that they can't just put in that, take out of their back pocket and pay, it starts getting into money they have to find somewhere else in the cost of the job.
I was trying to think back to our discussion on how we landed on 300, and I'm sorry, it's just been several months now, I think.
That's my problem.
Yeah, so, does anybody recall how we got to 300?
I think that was the number that, was it Jacob came up with in a little bit of his research, which,
He had examples from other
Yeah,
cities.
and it was Jacob who did the presentation to us. Yeah, that's right. He looked at other cities.
Okay. Okay. I'm fine with 400. And I like having this optional supplemental amount as if we can legally do it, not risk being challenged by court. But I like the idea that, let's say there's a developer that continues to violate this code, just in your face, I'm cutting down another tree, here's your check, cutting down another tree. At some point, wouldn't it be nice that we have the option to say, you know what, we're going to engage this optional supplemental amount at this point?
Well, I think the best way to do this, I'll have a discussion with I'm on thin ice. Hang on a minute. It's starting to crack. I have to lay down and go to the floor, try to find a ladder and spread my weight across.
I have a quick,
This has not been, it may come to the city council as a consent agenda item, which is what's going through the back of my head. In which case it wouldn't be any discussion, I would just get approved.
It's gotta be discussed and a motion made to approve.
Okay.
it, so it'll be on.
And so if it doesn't come up on regular business while I am in New Zealand, then I can, at the time of discussion, say that when bringing the language back to the group to talk about the $400 fine, there was a great degree of discussion about the fact that we still didn't have in there the value of the tree. And that the Urban Forestry Board had intended that to be in there in the original proposal, and somehow it got lost in the process of going through the coding. And so that's probably the best chance I have to bring that up without overstepping my roles as a counselor in relationship to staff, which I try to be careful of. But I'll have a talk with Jordan tomorrow morning. I may mention it to him then. That would be another appropriate way for me to do that. And I have no trouble doing that in that meeting with him tomorrow morning. I have a bi-weekly meeting. It happens to be tomorrow morning. So, and I just changed my, darn it, okay, that's my problem. I just changed my appointment with my physical therapist to earlier in the day because she had to leave, so it's right on top of my meeting with Jordan, but I'll make sure it gets there.
I can see, I know that when this first came up, that there was an intent to kind of expedite this process in a way because we were concerned that it could happen again, right? And we don't have anything in our code currently. So I can see where, if the tree appraisal thing is a hangup for people, it might be something that we want to encourage, hey, the $400 for inch DBH for now, and then actually have somebody come who does tree appraisals, a registered consulting arborist or somebody that does that, to come give a presentation, because I know there's a lot of confusion about, wow, that sounds kind of wild, and it's a little bit of an unusual thing. It's not very common, but it is something that can be done, and there are professionals doing it.
Oh, Everett, could you clarify when you say what's not common, what's not very
Tree
common?
appraisal is not a
Reappraisal,
big,
okay.
it's not a big part of the field, but there are certain people that are certified to do that and trained.
I think with the one in the street tree, we kind of looked at the value of the tree as lumber, didn't we?
There's several things to it,
Yeah.
and it's a little subjective.
Yeah,
A little bit. It's not like your standard forestry practice of triple stump or double stump, where
Yeah.
they know the value by board. All you got to do is calculate the board feet.
Mhm.
So yeah, the stumpage calculation is definitely, this is a
Yeah.
lot more complex.
Yeah, and there's 3 different calculations they typically do, and each one's a different process to come up with that number. And, but we might want to have somebody, there are a few people in our community that have that qualification. They may be willing to come present on that. And at that point, we could consider adopting some new amendment, but in the meantime, at least we have something on the books.
and my memory is that once we approve significant, once the council approves this in a vote, it then goes into the municipal code and the fee chart, which then can be amended without having to go through the whole process. Am I correct, Paul?
So this is development code. So the
Yeah.
update would be through the development code. Then the fines would be prescribed in the master fee schedule under community development.
Right.
And then to update that would just be a resolution updating the master fee schedule.
And the master fee schedule could say, and potential, and the value, plus the value of the tree if warranted.
If you're gonna add a new type of penalty,
That's go back
it
through.
would want to be in the actual code.
Okay.
as well.
So like I said, I will, bring it up in my meeting with Jordan and, ask that he kind of put that down the line before it comes to city council. And, I will also bring it up if it's at that time. I think the concern is, and you said it well, is that I think on the part of some members of the council, there is no sense of how do you appraise the value of the tree. I think that's kind of what I heard was, well, what is it? And who makes that determination and those things, so. But I can at least go back and say you're okay with the $400.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which was, where this discussion was supposed to take 3 minutes and not all this time, and I apologize.
Not to drink this, but trying to play catch up, looking at old minutes and what was presented at council, there doesn't seem to be any change except the $400 change versus.
Right. I would just went and looked the same things. That's what Jason, I think is that Jacob brought forward, yeah. But that isn't necessarily, are you looking at the minutes of this group or the minutes of the workshop? So this,
Workshop minutes. Looking at what Jacob had presented. in his packet.
yeah, I looked at what was in the packet as well. That's what I saw. So,
So I'm personally a little torn between, big picture, it would be nice to get something on the books ASAP that has a stiffer penalty than what's there now.
yes,
Because I don't know how long a delay it would be to have even the discussion, which has a questionable outcome of adding on this other potential weapon to go after people who disregard our
I believe it would have
lighting.
to go through the planning commission again. It's a change in the planning code. So that would add at least a month because of how the meetings roll,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
and maybe longer. And you might find confusion on the part of the planning commission, as just like you have on parts of the members of the city council, that this, it's very rare that something comes out of a group like like an advisory group that goes through the planning commission and goes right through with no changes, none. And so, in fact, that was commented on. And so that's one of the reasons why they wanted me to bring the number back to you folks, because it's like, okay, this is what you approved, this is what the planning commission approved, and we want to be sure you're okay if that's what we approve.
Hmm.
And so, that would slow things down, and there is always a risk that you could have some members of the planning commission who feel that, not that the city council always listens to them, we don't. They're an advisory council just like you are, although they're a little more advisory than the other one. I think on the hierarchy of advisory councils, for some reason, the minds of the planning commission, they're this, and city council is here. That's just, I didn't say that. So that's the risk I think take.
You have an idea about this?
I say, my initial feeling is just to have it go through as how it's written at the 400. What my initial feeling is. But I can also appreciate having that alternate. Having that alternate. But yeah, my final answer is the 400, how it's written right now.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think I would say that I think that we put this on and let it go once it goes through city council and gets approved, which could happen fairly soon. It may happen while I'm gone. Cause then, a year from now, or we get a little bit of history with this, then we can determine if it's appropriate to go back with a change to add the value of the tree. And then you're not changing the other language. The language is already there. You're just saying, should we add the value of the tree? And that may be an easier thing to explain and swallow to a bunch of citizens who really don't listen to these meetings because they're not here.
And I think ultimately for me, not having a firm understanding of how to change that policy or the verbiage or amending it or fill in the blank on how to change it at a later date versus getting it into code.
I've been on city council now for going on my 5th year, and I still don't know how it works.
So, which is another challenging and frustrating.
It's all voodoo to me. I think it involves little dolls with pins in them and smoke and mirrors.
So, so that's where my little bit of my hesitation is with having that alternate. So,
Okay, I'll take that back. I'll see that message gets to the council. I'll send it out through, Jordan. That's the appropriate way to get that information out. That's how we all agree we're gonna do it. Single point of contact and, go from there. Thank you.
Can I just add that I really, really appreciate that you came back and told us about this change? Because otherwise we may not have been aware of, because I didn't go to that particular meeting and I didn't look at the agenda and I was out of town. Otherwise, had I known, I would have been there. One thing perhaps you could consider telling Jordan or sharing with Jordan is it would have been nice for us to know that that part of what we recommended had been dropped. Because then one of us, if we felt so inclined, could have been sure to be there at the workshop and raise our hand if nobody else brought forth our ideas. So,
Well, and like I say, I take a certain amount of credit for not having the memory sufficient to remember what we did back then. And it looked to me like the language you guys have put forward, so I didn't say anything either. So
it was a long time ago that we talked about it.
before, I call it BS before surgery.
I don't think any more to add to that? Maybe?
Well, I was just thinking, kind of going on what Teresa's saying, maybe we can get back when something that we've put forth to planning commission, that somehow there's a report back as to what happened. Whether the planning commission modified it, whether the planning commission disapproved it, or what have you.
I think that ultimately falls back on us, on the other business and following up with that recommendation.
It may be that, let me see how best to approach this with Jordan. I may suggest that one of the things that was concerning here was that the language had been modified for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't brought back to this group after the modification before it went to the planning commission and to the counselors. And that probably is an oversight on our part. I'm very comfortable handling it that way.
Okay.
And I think that sometimes things don't look like that big a change, and they're trying to make it consistent with other code language. And like I said, a couple times when we've had code brought to us, we've asked for changes to it. And sometimes we'll hear, well, that's not really how it's written, but we don't care that's how it's written, this is what we want for language, you know? That sometimes it's the way it is. And sometimes the attorney says, no, that's the way it's gotta be written. But in this case, I think it just probably, I don't know where it went. I have no, I didn't write it, but, yeah. Okay,
Okay,
I'll take that to him.
thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful memory.
Moving on to board member comments. Does anybody have anything to add? I do not. I'm pretty interested in the George Grove cleanup and getting that off the ground. So,
What a cool opportunity.
yeah, pretty exciting. There's a lot of people that go through there. And George was around here forever. So, good guy. With that, we'll call the meeting to an end at 4:12. Next month's meeting is on Veterans Day. I remember brief conversation of us talking about something, but I don't remember what the decision was. If we were just postponing it a month or if we were changing the date for next month.
We're fine with changing the dates. If we have agenda items that need to come before the board.
Okay.
So I think it's just a matter of up to you guys what would work.
How about let's play it by ear, and if there's things that we need to do, we'll figure out a date, and if we can postpone it to December, that would work better for me, cause I will be out of town.
November, for the November.
Yep, I'm out of town for a week over Veterans Day. And then out of town another week over Thanksgiving.
So, okay. Veterans Day is not an option, right? Because cities,
City's closed.
you're closed. Okay.
The 18th would be an option for me if it came to that, but
I'm not available the 18th.
it's probably pretty tough to.
Oh.
Okay.
You're okay with
Okay.
doing that?